Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Tuesday. Welcome to history. Um, Before we kind of get going, I just wanted to review our quiz from yesterday because I handed them back, I think, and I think everyone in this room got theirs back. So I just wanted to walk through the quiz and sort of review what I was kind of looking for, and then we can jump back into World War II. Okay. So I'll give you a second to get ready there. So the first question I asked you here was, I said Italy experienced social and economic collapse in the 1920s, and the fascists were blaming someone for this situation. And who were they blaming, and why were they blaming them?
Fascists were blaming the democratic government.
Yeah.
Because they thought they weren't able to make decisions because of the insufficient votes.
Right. Because okay, yeah.
Also, the fascist thinks that because in democratics, the people also make choices.
Yeah.
And the fascist thinks that they should give power to those who can make the right choices.
Yeah.
Because they won't know if the people can make the right choices on their own or not.
Right. That's true, right? So, yeah, fascists were pointing the finger at the democratic government, but greater, they were pointing the finger at democracy itself, right? And they said that, in a democracy, you give power to the people, but again, what if the people don't know any better, right? What if the people aren't qualified to make the decisions they're making, right? What if they just aren't informed and they don't know, right? You should give power to people who have vision, right? People who are, the best people, however you define that, right? And so, yeah, fascists were blaming democracy and the idea that, giving power to people, it sounds nice, but it's actually a bad idea if the people don't know what they're doing, right? So, yeah, the fascists were blaming democracy there. Kind of a similar situation we said occurred in Weimar Republic, Germany in the 1920s. And there was, every day there seemed to be a different crisis happening, but why were there so many problems in Weimar, Germany? Avi, give me one thing. Number 2.
I actually got it wrong.
Okay, all of it?
Yeah.
Okay. David, do you have one for me? For number 2? No? Okay. Okay, give me one, Regina.
The reparation and the debt they need to pay.
Right. So Germany had to pay massive reparation payments to the Allies, and so that was a strain on the economy, right? Strain on finances when they had to pay this money back every month. That hurts. What else is going on?
The parliament just cannot make a decision due to them having too many small parties.
Yeah, they have. So the Weimar government has a lot of small political parties, and so they struggle to kind of get anything passed because they need a majority of votes, and they never seem to get it, right? So yeah, democracy doesn't seem to be working. Too many small parties. What else is going on? What else is going on? I think. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, I'd rather you talk than me. No? Okay. What else? Okay, so there was a lot of unemployment, right? The economy was in very rough shape. Currency, or they were experiencing inflation. And then they had all these smaller political parties trying to overthrow the government, right? And it's hard to kind of focus on, just sort of governing the country when you're worried about people storming in with guns and shooting you all, right? So this is kind of a stress on the government too. And we said that there's lots and lots of attempts to overthrow the government. Some of them are successful for a little while, right? We said the communists managed to overthrow the government for 4 or 5 days or something like that. And so that's a lot and there's one more thing too. That's a lot for a government to try and deal with, right? Economic disaster, reparation payments, a democratic government that doesn't seem to be working, people trying to overthrow the government all the time. And then there was kind of one more. Do you have anything, Regina? Is there one more that I missed that you have?
I don't know, but I put because America is the only one who lent out money to the Germans.
Right.
So when America's stock market crashed, or like the Great Depression,
Sure.
which American money is gone, so is the Germans.
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't actually thought of that, but because it happens a little later in the 1920s. But yeah, it's true, right? Is that really what's keeping Germany afloat here is America is pumping money into them, right? Trying to keep their economy going. And then when the U.S. stock market crashes, that money stops flowing, right? And then Germany has even more severe problems. The thing I was going to say is that the people, even though the Weimar government was, trying to run Germany, they actually didn't have a lot of support from the people either. And that's pretty tough, right? When you're trying to get people to do something and everybody hates you, that's difficult, right? So they had all kinds of potential issues here that they were kind of struggling to deal with. For number 3, I said if a person or if a political party is kind of sitting over there on the left wing, what do we know about their views on the government's role in people's social lives and the government's role in people's economic lives? What do we know there?
For in social life, usually they are last and fall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're usually more open-minded, and they don't really. I don't think they, care. Like they care less about tradition and the race.
Yeah. Yeah. People on the left tend to be a little more open, a little more accepting of diversity. They're not so concerned with tradition. They're not so concerned. They tend to be less nationalistic as well, for the most part. They tend to, they tend to support diversity, right? And things like gay marriage and immigration and all kinds of things. People on the left tend to be more in favor of those things. Avi, what about the economic?
Equal rights to everyone,
Okay.
and there should always be a change.
There should always be a change.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the economy, or like something new.
They tend to be more into change and reform. That's true. People on the right are more into tradition and status quo. That's true. What specifically about the economy, though?
They are more involved, like they're more into like social. What do you call it?
Mhm.
It's like social activity or something, like giving out pension, or like the government takes the hospital bill, but also they have higher tax.
Right. So if you're out on the left wing, you tend to be more comfortable with higher taxes, and those higher taxes are used to fund social programs, right? So pensions, unemployment insurance, disability pensions, money to combat homelessness. In some cases, if you go to the Scandinavian countries, it actually extends to free university, right? So here, it's definitely not free, but in places like Sweden and Norway, you can have your university paid for. Again, they have higher taxes there, but there's more social programs, right? The government is kind of providing for people. People on the right wing prefer if individuals kind of do their own thing, right? They'd be successful on their own terms. For number 4, I asked you for 4 characteristics of fascism. You could have said quite a number of things here. You could have, hey Kenny, you could have said quite a number of things. Maybe I'll give this, Kenny, here, I'll give that to you. You could have said a number of things. You could have said that, it's usually led by a charismatic leader. You could have said that there was a strong focus on nationalism and on the people. You could have said that fascists are very comfortable using force against their enemies and even against their own people. Anyone who goes against them becomes an enemy of the state, and so a fascist government will treat those people roughly, right? In fascism, in a fascist state, your individual freedoms are kind of subject to whatever the state says. The fascist government and the party leader are they are above the law, and in fact, they basically are the law. We said that their economy is usually controlled through syndicates, and so it's kind of private ownership, but it's one that's controlled by the government. What else am I missing here? What am I missing, Regina? Or anyone? What am I missing?
Law and order should be there to protect the tradition.
Right. So usually there's a strong. There's definitely whatever the law the fascist government makes. There's a strong pressure to obey the law, right? And again, violence will ensue if you don't obey the law. And sorry, the other thing you said was tradition?
Yeah.
Yeah, big focus on tradition, particularly on some kind of glorious past, right? And so most fascist countries look back to, a time when the nation was great, right? But also looking forward to a time when they will be great in the future, right? And of course, the charismatic leader is the one who knows how to take them there. What else did I miss?
I think the political state is usually totalitarian.
Right.
Where they only have one party, and the party is the state, and the leader is the party.
Ooh, yeah. So fascist states don't have multiple political parties. They only have one political party, and the party is the state, and the state is the party, and the party is the leader. Is that what you said? Or did I mix it up? Yeah. Close?
I think, yeah.
Yeah. All of these things kind of get glued together, right? There's no kind of, and we saw that, I pointed it out a few times with Nazi Germany, right? Where the German flag is gone and all you see are Nazi flags, right? And so Germany became the Nazi party, and of course the Nazi party was Hitler, right? And again, you don't really see that in a democracy. Canada is not the Liberal Party. Well, the Liberal Party is not Justin Trudeau, and we are not the Liberal Party as a country, right? We're different. But all of those things kind of get squished together into one, as in a fascist state, right? Anything else that I missed? No? Okay. What was the last question? I don't have that in front of me now.
Name 3 aspects of Hitler's new order.
Okay. Give me one aspect of the new order.
Me.
You.
All non-Germans will be kicked out.
Right? There was some sort of racial hierarchy that Hitler had, and all non-Germans were going to be mostly kicked out of Germany itself. That's true. David, give me another one.
Reorganize their
was he trying to do? He was going to reorganize the.
The system, like
Yeah.
society system.
Okay. He was going to reorganize the kind of economic system within Europe, right? He was going to have all the sort of European nations sending their raw materials to Germany, and Germany would manufacture them and sell them back, right? And of course make all the money as well. But that would make Germany kind of the economic center of Europe, right? And again, we said it was almost a colonial kind of model, right? Just on a much smaller scale. But that's what he's talking about. Can you give me one more?
Take back all the land they lose in World War One.
Oh yeah, to kind of recover all of those lost territories, right? Territories that were taken from Germany in the Treaty of Versailles. That's part of it. Regina, what's another part?
I don't know, to make like, because I think they are pretty much overpopulated back
Right,
then. So
right.
You're trying to make like a place for people.
Yeah, but it's true, right? He wanted, what was the German word that he was using?
I don't know how to pronounce it. but
Give it a try. Just just for my own enjoyment. Well, you started out okay. So it's Lebensraum. Okay, and it's German for living space, right? And so Hitler wanted to sort of regain those territories and kind of make Germany big enough for all of the ethnic Germans, right? So yeah, he was going to have to retake some of those lost territories, but also take over things that actually never belonged to Germany, but he was going to take them anyway, right? Anything else that we missed? Purity, economic, Lebensraum. Oh, there was one other new word. Started with an A. It was autarky.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What does that mean?
Economic self-sufficiency.
Yeah, right. He wanted Germany to be economically self-sufficient, right? And you also could have added into that one. The idea that I lost my train of thought. Oh, that Germany would need to rearm, right? It would need to rebuild its military, and that it would probably need to go to war to achieve this new order, right? He didn't think he could do all this peacefully. He was going to try, right? He was going to try and just take all these things and do all these things without starting a war. But he was also pretty sure that at some point he was going to have to fight it out with other powers, right? He didn't know who and he didn't know when, but he figured eventually somebody would try to stop him, right? Which eventually they do. Okay. So, yeah, that's the quiz. Let's jump back to where we were yesterday, okay? Yesterday we were talking a little bit about genocide. We were kind of trying to bring this genocide talk to an end. Believe it or not, there's actually a high school course that's Genocide Studies. So it's like Genocide Studies 12. But I don't think I could do 13 weeks of genocide, could you? I feel like that'd be really dark. It'd be a long, hard to have any fun in class when you're dealing with genocide, right? But when we were talking about the genocide or the treatment of Indigenous people here in Canada, I suggested these kind of questions to you. And, there's questions that I don't think we necessarily need to answer right now, but I did want you to think of them, right? The idea of what's the point of debating whether something was or wasn't a genocide years after the fact, right? And what about justice? How can we achieve justice when a genocide has occurred, right? And maybe more particularly when most of the people who did it are all dead. Right? How do we kind of achieve justice for those people? And then how should we remember the past? And why should we remember it in one way rather than in another way? And so some of those themes came up in the discussion of Indigenous people, but some of them came up yesterday as well in the story of the bell, right? And the bell, of course, was in that church. Actually, I'm going to back up here. The bell was in the church, and there were kind of, what was the controversy around the bell? What was happening?
There's something that represents the history of work.
Right. Yeah. There was this bell in a church tower in a small German town, and as you saw, it still had the name of Adolf Hitler on it. It still had a swastika on it. The same bell that had been installed in, I think, 1935, right? Still being used. And yeah, there was some controversy about whether that was the correct place for this bell. Should it still be up there ringing every day? Or was there something wrong with that, right? And again, there were two sides to that story, right? We met the mayor of the town who was like, no, it's a historic artifact and it should be, it's been ringing for 80 years or 90 years or whatever it's been. It should continue to ring, right? But then we met a woman who was like, no, that's a disgrace, right? For something from that period to continue to be in operation and for people to hear it every day knowing that, there's this swastika on it and it's associated with all of these, bad memories and awful atrocities. Like, ugh, we've got to get this bell out of there. That's gross. It's a disgrace.
I
Right?
have a question.
Yeah.
Since I was listening, is the stories, the bells in German, but the church is still in German or outside of Germany?
The church is in Germany,
Okay.
small town in Germany. Yeah, so there was some different ideas there, right? And we said that it was difficult to kind of know what to do with a dark past, right? And some people, like the mayor of this town, and then we met a young girl who was part of a history class cleaning gravestones, and both of them were kind of the idea that this was a long time ago, right? This happened. We don't deny that it happened, but we learned our lesson, right? We've apologized for what we've done. We've tried to make Germany a better country, and they have, for 100% they have. Can we just move on, right? Whereas Sigrid, the woman from the village, and the, I believe, historian that we heard from yesterday, their opinion was that actually no, we can't move on from this entirely. We have to remember, right? We have to mark the fact that this thing happened here. And I suggested to you yesterday that how you felt about that, I think, has a lot to do with how you answer this question, right? Is the Holocaust an aberration? Is it something crazy and strange that happened and could never happen again? Or is it not so crazy? Is it not so strange? Is it a very human thing to have happen? And again, depending on how you feel, I think that kind of informs how you feel about the bell and how you feel about the history of the Holocaust, right? If it's a crazy thing that only happened once, well, maybe we don't need to remember it quite so well. But if you do feel that, yes, something like this could very well happen again in the wrong situation, then yeah, maybe we do need to remember it. And again, I won't ask you to answer this question out loud, but you can, well, actually, I guess I did yesterday. But, you can answer it for yourselves, right? How should we see this, right? As something bizarre and crazy, or just something that is all too typical of human behavior, right? So after that, we kind of moved on. I'm going to jump ahead here. We moved on. I asked you to read this section of the textbook and answer these questions. And we kind of almost got through it. But can I give you just a few minutes to just scan through it and refresh your memory, and then we can talk about these few questions? Okay. 'Cause I need to remind myself too. Actually, I'll just be back in 2 seconds here. Hey, Ryan. Just a few more minutes and then we'll talk, okay? 2 more minutes. Okay, good people. I know there's a lot to read here, but there's not a ton to pull out, but there are some important trends, okay? So first of all, at the very beginning of that section, I'll just point out that they talk about situations in which people were resisting the Nazis, right? So obviously there were armies that were fighting the Germans on a number of fronts, but even within Germany and within territories that were occupied by Germany, people were kind of fighting back, right? Did you remember reading that? Yeah, and so people were fighting back in a number of ways, right? They were spying on the Germans, for one, right? And so espionage was important. They were also kind of finding ways to slow the Germans down, right? And so maybe if you worked in the mailroom for the Nazi whatever, right? maybe you didn't sympathize with the Nazis, and so maybe you just accidentally switched the labels on some of the envelopes. And when you sent the mail out, it all went to the wrong place, right? And just little things that you can do to screw them up, right? You're working in a factory, and then, whoops, you dropped your wrench into a machine. Now the factory is shut down for a day while they fix it, right? And so people find little ways to kind of slow the Nazis down however they can, right? Improper mail delivery, clerical errors, machine sabotage, whatever they can do. And you can see that some are actually developing into a full-on resistance, right? And so they're kind of fighting the Nazis from within the country, you know, as best they can with kind of limited weapons, right? So again, there's a war going on outside, and there's fronts, and people are shooting at each other, but there's also kind of a war going on inside, right? As people who don't agree with the Nazis are trying to find ways to defeat them, right? Or at least make it more difficult for them to do what they want to do. Some people are not cooperating fully, which I kind of like. So the text talks a little bit about two important areas of conflict or battle here. One is Stalingrad, which is in the Soviet Union. The other is at El Alamein, which is in Egypt, I believe, in North Africa. Let's talk about Stalingrad. The Nazis are trying to take it. Why did they want to take Stalingrad? I'm going to turn to page 133 so I can see the map here, but why did the Nazis want to take Stalingrad?
It's the field of production of USSR at that time.
Okay, so it's an important production center of the USSR. That's important, right? What else, Avi?
It has a lot of weapons.
They had a lot of weapons?
Yeah, machine guns and
Yeah. Where were those coming from? In part.
they were made there.
Okay. Yeah. So again, yeah, Stalingrad is kind of a weapons manufacturing center, so that's useful. But what else? What else is happening in Stalingrad?
It's pretty close to Moscow.
Yeah. So it's okay. So it's got some proximity to Moscow, right, which might allow the Nazis to take it. What else is Stalingrad an important location for?
Transportation.
Of?
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. Stalingrad is kind of a supply line from the Allies, like from the US and from Britain and from Canada into the Soviet Union, right? And so if the Nazis can take Stalingrad, they can shut down some weapons manufacturing, and they can cut a supply line to the Soviet Union, right? So it's kind of a big deal. As you read, it's kind of a bloody battle. And how does it end? Do the Nazis take it? No? What happens?
Not of course, but the black ones.
Yeah?
Like flanking them. And the commanders come enough to just stay inside one hit and not take them.
Yeah, so the Nazis kind of they wound up getting surrounded, right? And they've been trying to sort of take Stalingrad. The Soviets managed to get around them entirely, and so the Nazi soldiers are stuck. And like Kenny says, instead of trying to break away and flee back to Germany, they decide to just kind of wait it out, right? And wait for more Nazi soldiers to rescue them, right? And so the plan, of course, is to airlift supplies into them, but how does that go? Yeah, they don't have enough transport, and they don't really have enough goods, right? The textbook says they need 500 tons of goods every day. And it seems like they're delivering about what, 65? That's not going to do it, right? So these soldiers are going to run out of fuel, they're going to run out of food, they're going to run out of the things that they need. And so what do they have to do? Yeah. The first surrender of Nazi soldiers in World War II, right? And it comes pretty late, right? That's 1942, coming into 1943. Wow, right? 4 years. 4 years of success, and finally we get a defeat, right? And we read a little bit earlier, it was the same thing with Moscow, right? They tried to take Moscow and they couldn't do it, right? Their weapons wouldn't work, their soldiers weren't equipped for the cold weather fighting in Russia, and they didn't have enough people, they didn't have enough supplies, right? And so they couldn't encircle Moscow, couldn't take it, right? Tried to take Stalingrad here, lost out, right? Got surrounded and eventually surrendered. So this is kind of a big deal, right? This is the beginning of the Nazis starting to be pushed back, right? Similarly at El Alamein, what happens there? Do you know what happens there? They were they were pushed out, right? So if you look at the map on page 133, you'll see there that North Africa was basically held by the Germans, right? And certainly most of Europe was held by the Germans as well, right? They had taken France, Italy was allied with them, and they had taken most of Eastern Europe. You can see it kind of in that greeny brown shade, right? So Northern Africa is important to them because it's basically guarding the back door, right? It's making sure that the Allied forces can't kind of insert themselves from the Mediterranean into Europe that way, right? And so that kind of keeps their back safe. But the Allies, as you read here, they start to push them across Northern Africa, and then manage to push them out in El Alamein, right? And they have to return to Germany defeated, right? But again, this is a big deal for the Allies because now they've got access to the lower part of Europe, right? And so, as you read, they decide to insert themselves into Sicily, right? They can use Tunis and Tunisia as kind of a jumping off point. They can insert themselves into southern Europe and start to push the Nazis back, right? And doing that eventually leads to the surrender of Italy, and then Italy will switch sides, right? So as you can see here, the tide is turning, right? The Nazis are slowly being pushed back from the Soviet Union out of Northern Africa. In Southern Europe and Italy, they're being pushed back. And so now kind of what needs to happen is they need a Western offensive, right? And that's going to come in 1944 with the landings at Normandy, right, for D-Day. And you've probably seen, well, not probably, but you might have seen D-Day shown in movies. It's quite a popular military battle, especially for North America, because the British, the US, and the Canadians were the ones that did it. If you've ever seen Saving Private Ryan, the first part of that movie is the D-Day landings, right, where they're entering into northern France from Great Britain, and it's pretty intense, right? The first part of that movie, yeah, it's It's an intense 15 minutes. But you can see that the Nazis are kind of being pushed back from everywhere. Right? The last thing here is that there's four meetings that happen, right? Casablanca, Tehran, Moscow, and Yalta. And so the Allied leaders here, Roosevelt from the US, Stalin from Soviet Union, and Churchill from Great Britain, they all meet and kind of make decisions about what they're going to do. So what happens at Casablanca? What's the big thing that gets decided there? Maybe two things. Well, the Italy thing, right? So they decide that they're going to insert themselves into Southern Europe through Italy. That's one decision that gets made. And then there's a second decision, which is what is it? I'm looking at page 137. Looking at page 137 at Casablanca. They decide to attack through Italy, and they decide put off the invasion of France. Okay, but the first sentence. Yeah, so they basically make an agreement here about how this war is going to end, right? Remember, World War I ended when Germany said, okay, time out, no more shooting, let's talk about this, right? But here, the Allies are saying that's not happening this time, right? We're not doing a ceasefire negotiations. The only way this ends is if Germany surrenders unconditionally. Right? So that's an important thing, right? We're not gonna negotiate. We're not gonna talk it out. The only way this ends is when Germany puts up their hands and gives up with no conditions. Right? That's important. Tehran. What did they decide at Tehran? I think there's maybe a couple things here. Two things.
Invasion of Europe is a priority.
Right? So they have Europe to deal with, and I know we haven't talked about this really yet, but there's also a war in the Pacific, right? There's a war with Japan going on. So the Allies decide that Europe is the priority for now, right? What else did they decide on? Yeah, that's going to be important, right? The idea that we're leaving Eastern Europe to be liberated by the Soviet Union. And I think you read in the textbook that Churchill had a big problem with this, right? Winston Churchill was like, look, if we let the Red Army into Eastern Europe now, we're never going to get them out. We're actually going to have to fight to get them out of Eastern Europe. Let's be careful about this. But the US President Roosevelt, he was like, no, let's just worry about winning the war and we'll worry about politics later. Right? So these two leaders had a bit of a disagreement on this point. The decision was made that they would leave Eastern Europe to the Soviet Union. But again, as we probably know, that turned out to be a problem, right? Because the Red Army really did not leave Eastern Europe until the 1990s. Right? So this little decision at Tehran actually has a lot of repercussions, right? It has a lot of effects. We see here Stalin also agrees to attack Japan when possible, right? They meet again in Moscow. What do they decide in Moscow? Interesting that it's not on here. What do they decide in Moscow? And in Moscow, it's just Churchill and Stalin, right? Roosevelt is at home. He's trying to get reelected as president, right? It's an election year, so he's not there. It's just Churchill and Stalin. And what do they agree to? This is important too. Let's see. Does anyone have it? Nope, that was before. Let's see. Here we go. I'm looking at the top of page 135. It's October 1944. So what does it say? A concerned Churchill flew to Moscow to meet Stalin. He went along with Churchill and Stalin's agreement on post-war spheres of influence. Churchill proposed establishing spheres of influence in the Balkans and Central Europe that mirrored the reality of the situation. The Soviet army was in control of Central Europe and could not be dislodged without force. Right? So it's become clear to Churchill that now that Stalin and the Red Army are in Eastern Europe, they're probably not going to leave. And so Churchill says, okay, Joseph Stalin, you'll kind of have some influence over Eastern Europe, right? We'll have some influence over Western Europe, but we'll agree to stay out of each other's backyard, right? And you can support the nations in Eastern Europe and we'll support the ones in Western Europe. And again, the idea here was that all of those countries would get democratic governments, and that the bigger powers like the Soviet Union and the US and Great Britain, they would kind of stay out of it, right? They would help them, but they would let them do their own thing. But as we'll find out shortly, Stalin isn't going to go along with that. He says he is, but he's really not. And then finally we get to Yalta, and what do they decide? What do they decide in Yalta? A couple things, a few things. Oof.
Germany would be position.
Right? So,
along the river.
yeah, so the Elbe River is going to run kind of north and south through Germany. They figure that since the Soviets are coming from the east and the Allied armies are coming from the west, eventually they'll meet, right? And then they'll have basically conquered Germany. They figure they'll meet at the Elbe River, and that'll kind of be a dividing point. Of course, later it'll be where East and West Germany are kind of permanently divided, but we'll get to that later. So they agree to that. They're going to sort of meet there and sort of divide Germany that way. What else did they agree to? Let's see here. Agree to demand, more reparations. Right? Germany's going to have to pay for the war again. There's a little bit of deja vu. They agreed to destroy German industrial capacity. They want to create a strong Poland, right? So Poland is going to be recreated again, right? It was created after the First World War. Stalin and Hitler took it over at the beginning of the Second World War, but Poland will be kind of recreated as a buffer state between Germany and the Soviet Union, right? And so this is kind of bringing us to the end of the war, right? And Yalta happens very close to the end of the war. But what happens during these meetings is kind of the trust level starts to decline very quickly. And so Stalin kind of joins Churchill and Roosevelt and sort of coordinates with them in fighting the Nazis. But really, Stalin is not, he doesn't trust the other two. He doesn't trust Roosevelt and Churchill, and Roosevelt and Churchill don't trust Stalin, right? This is a case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? But as the Nazis get closer to defeat, the two sides, the Soviets and the Western powers, increasingly see themselves, they see each other as the enemy, right? So earlier on in the war, they're coordinating. Later on in the war, they're kind of looking at each other very suspiciously across the table. And by the time the war is over, there will be there'll be no friendship between these groups. But we'll get to that. Would you like to take a break? I thought you might. Okay, let's take a break and then we'll come back, okay? Okay. So, very quickly, where's my glasses? Just to review here. So, we have the Battle of Stalingrad, right? So, originally the Nazis and the Soviets have a non-aggression pact. They're not going to attack each other or interfere in each other's business. But of course, we know Hitler doesn't like to abide by the agreements he's made. He'll stab anyone in the back if it works for him. And so, yeah, he attacks the Soviets in, I think, 1941 with Operation Barbarossa. Tries to take Moscow, isn't able to do it. Here in the spring of 42, tries to take Stalingrad, and after months of fighting, still doesn't manage to, right? And actually, he loses kind of a chunk of his army that are forced to surrender, right? Because the Soviets are able to encircle them and cut them off, and the Germans are unable to supply them with enough goods and unable to rescue them from where they are. So this is kind of the first surrender of Nazi troops in World War II. And again, it comes almost like 4 years into the war. So the Nazis have kind of been on a roll, right? They've really been winning for the last few years. But fortunately, at least from my perspective, that's going to change. At El Alamein, like we heard about or like we read about, the Nazis are going to be pushed out of North Africa. And again, that's useful as well because, again, Northern Africa is kind of guarding the back door, right? It's guarding the southern part of Europe for the Nazis. And so gaining that, the Allies gaining North Africa, means that they have kind of a jump-off point to invade southern Europe. And that's exactly what they do, right? They leave from Tunis, Tunisia, they bounce over to Sicily, and then they're pushing north into Italy, right? Which will eventually result in the Italians surrendering and then declaring war on Germany shortly thereafter, right? And yeah, here's a Winston Churchill quote. Here's a primary source for you. It may almost be said, before El Alamein, we never had a victory. After El Alamein, we never had a defeat, right? So Churchill's kind of, saying that this is, for those who watch sports, this is the TSN turning point, right? This is where it all kind of started to go well for the Allies, before TSN turning points were invented. We said that there's a number of agreements here in Casablanca and Tehran and Moscow and Yalta. In Casablanca, they decide they're only going to accept an unconditional surrender from Germany, right? That's the only way this ends. Germany gives up, no questions asked, right? In Tehran, they agree to create a second front in France, but really to invade Italy first, right? They also start to talk about the idea of spheres of influence, right? And again, that's going to be important because that's going to define the Cold War for the next, from the end of World War II, really to 1991 or so. It's going to define the interaction between the Soviet Union and the West, right? So this kind of idea first comes up here, and of course Churchill is going to warn Roosevelt, right? He's going to say, look, letting the Red Army into Eastern Europe is a bad idea. We'll never get them out, right? We'll actually have to go to war to get them out of Eastern Europe. Don't let them in. Roosevelt is unconcerned at the time, and so they agree that the Soviet Union will liberate Eastern Europe. But again, Churchill is right. They don't leave after that. In Moscow here, just with Churchill and Stalin, it's a sweet little romantic date. Just the two of them. They get to spend some time with each other. Neither of them trust one another, of course, at this point. But they agree to that idea of spheres of influence. And so again, this will define a lot of the Cold War to come later. And then at Yalta, they're kind of right at the end of the war, and they start deciding on how they're going to. This is kind of it's almost like a Treaty of Versailles kind of thing, right? Where the Allies are like, okay, what are we going to do when the war is over? How are we going to deal with Europe? What's going to happen, right? And so We see they agree to dividing Germany in half, and Berlin itself is going to get divided into 3 and later 4 pieces. And then Churchill and Roosevelt are pushing their support for democracy. So all of those countries that are liberated from Nazi control, Churchill and Roosevelt are saying, but we need to set up a democratic government in all of those countries, right? And whoops, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to ban that. And of course, Stalin is kind of nodding, right, and saying, "Oh yes, of course, democratic countries. Yep, we'll do that." But of course, he's thinking to himself, "That's not happening, right? I am going to exert control over those countries because I want a buffer between the Soviet Union and the Western world, right? I want a bit of a cushion." And so Churchill and Roosevelt are talking democracy. Stalin is kind of nodding and but he doesn't really care that much about it. So it doesn't really talk too much about it in the text here, but the Normandy landings are a big deal, right? This is the Allies re-entering Europe, taking France back from the Nazis, and starting to push into German territory. Again, it's kind of a big deal here in North America because the Americans and the Canadians have a lot to do with this particular operation, right? So you can see here, there's a number of beaches where the Allied armies are going to come ashore. There's Utah, well, they code name it, right? It's not, they're using US names. But there's Utah Beach and Omaha Beach where the Americans are going to come ashore. There's Gold Beach and Sword Beach where the British are going to come ashore. And then there's Juno Beach, which is where Canada is going to come ashore. And so this is kind of, here in Canada, we pay more attention to Normandy because, yeah, we have a role to play here. And all of these armies, fight very well, and they're able to keep themselves on the beach. And then after kind of gathering themselves, they start to push into France and push the Nazis back into Germany. And again, if you've seen Saving Private Ryan or other movies that include this, you'll know it was a pretty ugly process of trying to come ashore while the Nazis are machine gunning you the whole time. But yeah, it's a big deal, right? And so yeah, this is within 2 months. Within 2 months, the Allies have liberated northern France, and they're actively pushing toward Germany. So again, that El Alamein thing, that's a big turning point, right? And there's going to be lots of Allied victories through 1944 and into 1945, right? The other thing we should talk about is the death of Adolf Hitler, because that's worth celebrating, I think. See, look at all this Russian hacking. Russian hacking, I swear. Okay, go away. So Hitler is going to take the honorable way out and commit suicide, right? So in April 1945, it looks like Germany is going to lose, right? They've got the Soviets advancing into Germany from the east. They've got the Allies, they've got Britain and the US and Canada coming in from the west. They've lost their Italian ally. Italy has declared war on them. It's over, right? It's pretty much over. And so he decides that he's going to commit suicide, which he does. And so he's in a bunker in Berlin immediately before he gets married to his longtime girlfriend, strangely enough. So he doesn't make a commitment until the end, and then he kills himself. And immediately before he gives instructions to his next in command, he says, fight to the last man, everything for the fatherland, everything for Germany, do not surrender, fight to the very last person. And then he bails. But yeah, and so in April 30th, the bodies here of Hitler and his wife Eva Braun are found, again with a bullet hole in the head. Now, some people have liked to feed a conspiracy theory that, well, Hitler's still alive, right? He never died, right? He made it out of that bunker. That was someone else's body in the bunker. He survived. Have you heard that before? Do you believe it? Yeah? David? He what? Oh, from the Marvel Universe? I don't know. Did that happen in Marvel Universe?
Marvel?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think they do have a story about that.
Is there a story where...
Well, I mean, Hitler's died like 10,000 times in Marvel.
Is it a multiverse thing? Is it a I don't know. Anyway, I'm gonna either make you feel better or make you feel worse, but he is actually dead. And one of the reasons we know this is a very recent, this is 2018, a very recent publication of the Memoirs of a Russian Interpreter. And so I guess she was there, she was in Germany at the time, she was interpreting for the Soviets and the Russians, and she was actually given a set of teeth that she kept for a long time. And recently, the teeth had reappeared. I guess they were in somebody's attic, stored away somewhere. The teeth reappeared, and they were able to check it against Adolf Hitler's records from his dentist. Okay, and what they were able to find. So these are the teeth. So as you can kind of see, well, let me turn out the lights here so you can see. It's kind of gross. Teeth are gross. But what you're looking at here are sections of the jaw, right? So you can see these are human remains. They're parts of the teeth. And you can probably see here that there's a lot of dental work, right? So there's a broken tooth. There's a lot of wear. There's metal fillings and caps here. This is a bridge, right? So he was missing a few teeth in a row, and so sometimes they build in a bunch of fake teeth in that spot. So there's a bridge there. There's kind of a lot of dental work, right? And again, teeth and dental work is very distinctive, right? Everyone's mouth is a little different. Everyone's teeth are a little different. And certainly the things that we have done to our teeth are all a little different as well, right? So the dental records of Adolf Hitler actually match these teeth that were collected by this interpreter in 1945. And so it seems that these are the teeth of Adolf Hitler. Gross, right? But also there they are. So yeah, this is a new study. French scientists looked at the fragments of these teeth, and they say here, our study proves that Hitler died in 1945. The teeth are authentic. There is no possible doubt. He did not flee to Argentina in a submarine. He is not in a hidden base in Antarctica or on the dark side of the moon. He died there in 1945, right? And again, there's been lots of conspiracy theories and wild stories about the fact that he fled. And actually not many, but some Nazis actually did flee to Argentina. They did make it there, but he was not one of them. And so again, if you're disappointed by this, I'm sorry, but it's also nice to know that he is finished. And so we said that his second in command, Hitler, went to him and said, I'm going to commit suicide over here in a minute, but keep fighting, everything for the fatherland, fight to the last man, woman, or child, right? Germany will not surrender. Hitler committed suicide, and about a week later, their highest in command said, you know what, we're going to lose this war, we surrender. So, despite what Hitler had told them to do, here we go. German General Alfred Johl called up the Allies and said, okay, we're done. Hands up, we surrender. And so, yeah, on May 7th, we have a ceasefire and then an official surrender and an end to the war in Europe, finally. Yeah, what a wild ride. Now, tomorrow we'll look very quickly at the end of World War II, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the Pacific War, but not very much. And so maybe that will be, good for you not to spend too much time on the Pacific War, or maybe you will be disappointed. But either way, we're going to spend just a little bit of time on that, and then I actually have a movie to show you which might be very interesting, especially in the context of what's going on kind of in the world today. There's a lot of issues that we can talk about that this movie kind of raises, okay? But we'll deal with that maybe, what's today, Tuesday? Probably on Thursday, maybe on Friday for sure, okay? But until then, I'll let you pack it up. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good afternoon. Buenas noches, whatever. See you tomorrow.